And it please the court, counsel. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you have now received and heard all of the evidence in this case. And that evidence overwhelmingly proves that the defendant traveled to the home on Bellagio on August 27, 2015 to hunt down and kill Amanda and Lamar. He made a choice that day. He made a series of decisions in the early morning hours and into the morning of August 27 that led him to the backyard of his previous home, armed with 2 firearms and shooting into it with one of them, the 9mm. He had time to reflect that morning. He had time to change his mind. He didn't do that. And instead, he took the time to form the intent to kill. We began this case talking about how it wouldn't be a whodunit, that it would be a why he did it. And the evidence you've been presented in this case overwhelmingly proves not only that the defendant committed these murders and all the other charges in the indictment, but why. He committed these murders and these acts because he was angered. Not a sudden anger, but an anger and in a resentment that built over time. He committed these murders because he was rejected. Rejected by Amanda, who had moved on with another man. Rejected when she didn't answer his text back fast enough, when she didn't pick up his calls that morning, and when she didn't reply with his advances as he was telling her, "I love you and I miss you," the week leading up to the murders. And rejected because she wouldn't confirm what he believed and he knew to be true. He committed these murders, the murder against Lindy Dobbins, because he was mad at her as well. Lindy Dobbins was Amanda's best friend. Lindy Dobbins was the type of best friend that stuck with Amanda that summer of 2015, through the divorce, through the injunction. She was there with her best friend so much that on the morning of August 27th, she was willing to leave work to go console and help her best friend, whose house had been ransacked the night before. And when the defendant entered that home, and he didn't find Lamar, and he found Lindy instead, he killed her. He thought she had been meddling and she was part of this whole thing to keep Amanda away from him. And finally, he committed these murders because he hated Lamar Doberly and that relationship. The defense entered some text messages just today wherein the week leading up, the defendant tells Amanda, "Don't worry, I'll be speaking to him soon enough." And then over that week, between the photograph and the adult toys he found in the house the night before, that was it. That was the confirmation. That was the confirmation he wanted from Amanda. Amanda wasn't going to do that. She wasn't going to give that to him. In their situation, it was none of his business. But he got it. And he got it in the early morning hours of August 27th. And he went there with the intent to kill Lamar and to kill Amanda, which is also evidenced by him screaming, "Where is he? Where is he?" Not only from the backyard, as Lamar told you, but within the house as he's hunting and searching for Lamar. I want to take a few minutes and go over the evidence in this case as it pertains to the law and the elements you heard the judge describe to you earlier. We're going to start with first-degree murder. And if you recall from jury selection and from the instructions you were read earlier, there are two theories under which the state is proceeding first-degree murder. We have felony murder and we have premeditated murder, both of which apply to Amanda and Lindy. I want to deal first with first-degree felony murder and talk about that as it relates to both Amanda and Lindy. You heard the elements earlier as the judge went over them with you, and that obviously the first element is that both Amanda and Lindy are dead. The second element is that while engaged in or in the attempted commission of a burglary, the defendant caused the death of Amanda and Lindy. And that he was the person, not anyone else, who actually committed this murder. And we're going to go through that in a minute, and I want you to keep in mind that although the evidence overwhelmingly supports premeditated murder, as to this theory, it is not necessary to prove. These are the three elements that have to be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. Obviously, we know that Amanda and Lindy are deceased. You heard from the medical examiner, Dr. Bulick, about their injuries and that they are no longer here with us. That second element about being engaged in the commission of a burglary. We're going to talk a lot more about burglary as we go through the crimes, but essentially the elements of burglary, as they were explained to you, are that James, the defendant, entered into a structure owned by or in the possession of Amanda. And then at the time he entered, he had the intent to commit an offense therein, in this case an assault or battery. And some of you, you may be thinking, well, it was her husband, that was their home before, is that a burglary? The evidence shows, in fact, it is. In this case, under the injunction and court order, which I'll show you in a minute, that he was under, he was not allowed to be in that home, and Amanda had exclusive possession of that home. She was in possession of that home, and at the time he entered that home, as we know, he not only had the intent to commit an assault or battery, but in this case, a homicide. And here's this injunction for you, and you have this in evidence, but essentially a couple portions of that discuss the no contact and the home. In this paragraph 2, it indicates that the respondent shall not go into, in, or within 500 feet of petitioner's current residence, which is listed as 260 South Bellagio. And then in another section of the injunction, it gives temporary exclusive use and possession of that home to the petitioner. And the petitioner in this case was Amanda. And so that's what makes these acts and these unlawful entries into that home, a home he lived in prior to, but was not allowed to go in anymore, burglaries. The third element of felony murder is obviously that he is the one who actually killed. And again, this isn't a case of who did it, but as you have heard, the evidence is obviously Rachel Hendricks as an eyewitness to that, identifying the defendant as the shooter, as the one who shot from the outside of the house and who was also inside the home with guns on that occasion. This is someone she knows. She babysat their children. She had frequent contact with the defendant. And obviously the other evidence in the case corroborates her identification. His cell phone information, both the cellular mapping and the data that was taken off his phone, put him in that house in and around the time of the murders. And other evidence as to identity is the two murder weapons in this case. The .45 caliber that Thomas Colley described as the weapon that shot the .45 ammunition in this case that killed these women was located in his vehicle when he was arrested in Virginia. And as we know, the other murder weapon, the 9mm, was located inside the marital home, which contained his DNA. I want to move now into premeditated murder. So what we just discussed was felony murder. And I want to take each one of the victims, in this case Amanda and Lindy, separately. But before we do that, I want to remind you of that instruction the judge gave you, and we'll be talking a lot about premeditation this morning. and that premeditation is killing after consciously deciding to do so. The period of time is not fixed. It must allow time for reflection, and that the premeditated intent to kill must be formed before the killing. And if you think back to jury selection, now you're probably like, oh, these are why they talk about these issues. And we talked a lot about that in jury selection. And you guys all understood that premeditation is not, as some people may think before walking into a courtroom and serving as you were doing here today. It's not, it doesn't require a 3-month plan. It doesn't require anything more than time to make the decision and to reflect on that decision. When we talk about the premeditated murder as to Amanda Colley, the judge read these elements to you, and obviously we know Amanda Colley is dead and that was caused by the defendant in this case. So we're going to spend a lot of time on the premeditation element, the third element. Before we get into the premeditation that formed that morning, I want to talk about something that we call motive. Motive is not anything that the state has to prove, but motive is important, and the motive in this case and everything that happened leading up to August 26th and 27th is obviously important in putting in context the premeditation that came that morning. What do we know? We know that in the months leading up to the murders, that the defendant was keeping tabs. He was keeping tabs on Amanda. He had an injunction. He wasn't supposed to be around her, but he couldn't let it go. You heard the testimony of Mike Dickens, and you saw the evidence of their text messages. He didn't really want to remember that happened, but you saw them entered into evidence through Detective Colley. He was keeping tabs on her, asking Mr. Dickens to check and see if she was there. Several times he did that. All throughout this time, he's calling her names. You've seen what he's called her: bitch, whore, evil. He texted Mike Dickens that during this time she was going to pay for how she was treating him. Obviously, we know during this time he's suspicious about the affair. He's looking for confirmation, and he's not getting it from Amanda. But close in time to the murders, we know he got that confirmation. He got the photo sent by Mike Dickens to Rhonda Colley, who passed it along to him. A photo of a man that in his mind, yep, that's him. And you saw how he confronted her about that. He was further confirmed the night before the murders with the adult toys he found in the marital bedroom. And that began that night, the harassment via text, calls, and voicemails that he began to leave on her phone early in the morning leading up to before he went to court. And I'm going to publish one of those voicemails for you here that was left at 8:34 a.m.
It's really funny you don't want to talk yet, huh? You know what? We don't need to talk. Don't do nothing to me. I won't do nothing to you. I won't bring this up in court about what you really are. And we both know what you really are. You're lucky I don't tell our children about this, Amanda. You're fucking disgusting. That's what you are.
I want to talk to you about all of that motive and all of that buildup, and as it leads into that morning where we just left off at 8:30 prior to court that morning. What do we know? What do we know about the choices and the decisions and the time to reflect that this defendant had for hours before he decided to go to that house on Bellagio? What do we know? We know that he got up that morning, he dressed for work, he wore his shirt, his work clothes, a tie, his work badge can be seen as he comes to the courthouse here around the 9 o'clock to 9:30 hour. So he got up with the intent to go to work. At 9:41, when the defendant left court, approximately 14-minute phone call was placed to Amanda. We will never know what happened on that phone call. That phone call occurred when the defendant was driving on Highway 16. It began as he was headed towards 95, as evidenced through the mapping that Agent Harrison did. We will never know what happened on that call, but we know that that call is pivotal in the decision-making of the defendant in this case. Something was said, something happened in that call, and he made that decision. I'm not going to work. And instead, that call would have ended approximately 9:55. He got off on 210 again, and you will see in the records at 9:57, he's mapped again in that area, the time he would have gotten off that call. Just 2 minutes after he would have hung up, he's trying her back. Now she's not answering. So whatever happened in that call didn't sit well with him. He wanted to get her back, and she doesn't answer. We know that at 10 a.m., there's a receipt for a purchase he made for Gatorade at the Speedway on 210 in front of Southampton neighborhood. Gatorade that can later be seen in the front passenger seat of his car after he's pulled over in Virginia. So we know he has the call with Amanda, he gets off 95 and 210, and he goes to the Speedway. The next thing we know in his timeline is there's a text at 10:03 a.m. to her in his phone, who he had titled Bitch, and he's saying please, clearly trying to get her back on the phone. 10:07 a.m., there's a voicemail left on Amanda's phone, a voicemail that is what can be referred to as a butt dial. And I want you to listen to this voicemail, and then I'm going to talk to you about its contents. That voicemail proves that the defendant had left the Speedway. He's now at the home on Garrison, a home where you heard one of the deputies describe two older gentlemen that were staying at the home. One was later identified as his father, the dog walker, and another gentleman. You can hear shuffling, and you can hear a man telling him, "You're a moron." He's at the house at 10:07 a.m. And what is he doing? He's retrieving all of those firearms. The 9mm case for the murder weapon is located under his bed. A handgun holster is strewn out on the floor. And you saw all of the gun cases and ammunition that was strewn out on the left side of the bed. Similar ammunition that was found in his car in Virginia, and that was used in the murder of Amanda and Lindy. You might remember us referring to the zombie rounds. Those were located in his bedroom, and that green polymer as part of those zombie rounds was in Amanda's body. Here are a couple photographs of that house and how it appeared on that date. There's the holster as it laid near the foot of the bed. Here's the left side of the bed, if you recall. Gun cases, ammunition strewn about the floor. And when crime scene technician Keegan organized that, she located some of those 45 zombie rounds and also 9mm rounds. And in this photo, you can also see the gold and black boxes just in between those two that are 5.56 rounds. Similar box is located in the front seat of the car in Virginia along with the AR. And finally, in his room, the case for the 9mm is just there underneath his bed. So where does he go after the house? We know from Deputy McGinnis that he is seen on video at the Speedway a second time. The Speedway just outside the neighborhood is not far. Detective English showed you a map. That Speedway sits right at the entrance of the neighborhood. So we have receipts where he went once, he purchased a Gatorade, and then we have receipt and video from the second time when he returned. And if you recall Deputy McGinnis' testimony, he pulls into the gas pumps at 10:11, gets a little bit of gas, And then at 10:14, he's on that video, and this time he makes a purchase of a beer and cigarettes. All of this activity between 10:02 and this 10:13, 10:14 time frame is corroborated further by the cellular mapping in this case. Special Agent Harrison put him on that home tower during that time frame. The next important and deadly decision the defendant makes in this case is now he's armed, now he's topped off with gas for his fleeing the area, and now he is headed with a beer to calm his nerves to the house in Mirabella. He drives 15 miles. 15 miles takes approximately 15 to 20 minutes, depending on how fast you're driving. That's 15 to 20 minutes for him to reflect, for him to change his mind, and for him to stop and call the whole thing off. But he doesn't. What is he doing? At 10:22, he's calling her again. She doesn't answer. You see him now moving to the west side of the tower on 210. 10:23. So when he sends his text message to Amy Mason, his goodbye text message, he knows exactly what he's going to do, and he's telling her, "I love you," before he does it. At 10:26 a.m., he tries again. He tries to call Amanda. She doesn't answer. She's done. After that 14-minute phone conversation, she's done. She doesn't answer him again. And at this point, the mapping puts him now, we're moving south on 210, back away on 16 towards Mirabella. So he's not getting her. These next two phone calls are important, 10:28 a.m. and at 10:31 a.m. There's phone calls from Dad in his phone. Off to the side here, it's notated that he's on Highway 16, closer to Mirabella, and by the time the last call comes in and that last contact with Dad, he's hitting on the Mirabella Tower. What do we know about what happened during these phone calls? Recall the testimony of Brittany Mano, the dog walker, who was in Southampton that morning, I think above Garrison. What did she tell you? She told you she was late to an appointment that she normally made at 10. She knew she was there about 10:15, 10:20. Take her a couple minutes to get up the dog Max, get him ready, and head out the door. What did she hear? She describes hearing a frantic and panicked elderly gentleman who she later found out was Mr. Colley Sr. on the phone, and another gentleman screaming back on the phone. Those are those phone calls, ladies and gentlemen. The times line up with her testimony and the phone calls. And what does she say she hears? She hears Mr. Colley Sr. say, "Son, don't do it. We'll take you to someone else's house. We'll take you to your aunt's house. We'll take you to see your kids. You rely on your memory." What she said. She said Mr. Colley Sr. was panicked, saying, "Son, don't do it." And what was the response on the other end of the phone? "I can't take it anymore." His dad was trying to talk him out of it, was trying to beg him not to do what he knew he was about to do because he knew he just left his house. After going through his bedroom and arming himself with guns and mad, the dad knew. The dad called and tried to stop it. What else do we know? When the defendant made his way to the Mirabella neighborhood, he parked, not in the driveway. He didn't go over there for a social gathering. He parked in an adjacent neighborhood and made his approach from the rear. How do we know that? We know that for a lot of reasons in this case, some of which is the testimony of Miss Jennifer Meadows. She was brief, if you remember her. She's a neighbor that lives on Porta Rosa Circle, and she's the one that describes you. She went out, she heard a gunshot, she heard a second one. The first two were really loud. She described it as sort of out of her back yard and to the left, which if you were looking at the map was absolutely in this direction. And then she described hearing a series of gunshots later that were more muffled. Well, that makes sense. The first two we know he was in the backyard shooting into the house. And then we know after that he entered the house. So the gunshots at that point would be muffled. And what did Deputy Canine Deputy Melanie Merritt tell you? That after this was all done, and she harnessed up Inverness, that Inverness took her across the backyard, across the berm, into the neighborhood on Porta Rosa, and did circles around a driveway of a house, indicating that there had been a car pickup or someone left in a car. The same house that Ms. Meadows indicated was in foreclosure and had been abandoned for some time. We know he armed himself with 2 firearms, not one, before making his approach, and obviously that he shot into the rear of the home with a 9mm, as evidenced by Lamar's testimony, Rachel's testimony, and the crime scene evidence, which shows that crime scene technician Lamar pulled those 2 bullets out of the wall, and they were turned over for analysis. Amanda and Lindy called 911 as they ran and hid. The defendant entered the home clearly looking for Lamar, and he doesn't find him anymore. Does he stop? No. He continues to pursue the women in the home and look for Lamar. And I want to play these calls for you again. I know it's been some time, and you just heard them quickly. And I want you to focus and remember, this first call is Amanda's call. It starts just slightly before Lindy's call. And now that you've seen the crime scene photos and you kind of know the vantage point, you know Amanda was over by the toilet area. And you will hear her begging with the defendant. You will hear a series of gunshots, one to her, one into the closet, a pause, 2 more into Lindy. And then I want you to pay close attention when he comes out of that closet. You will hear as he approaches her, she says, "No, no, no, please don't." You will hear him say, "Fucking whore." And then you, on her phone, you hear one final gunshot, and you kind of hear how the phone cuts out. And then it'll be picked up and sort of kind of finish the end of the story with Lindy's call from the other vantage point of the closet. Record and publish Lindy's call.
Ma'am, what's your address? Ma'am? Hello? Hello? Well, I didn't receive that. No, I didn't. She was screaming bloody murder. That got her? Oh my God.
When you look even at the scene that day and how that played out, you see and hear both from the 911 calls and Rachel as a witness able to fill in some of that Amanda is shot once. Probably an attempt, get off me. She's, don't go in there. Please put that down. He shoots Amanda and then he turns his attention to the closet. He killed Lindy and then he returned back to Amanda. Dr. Bulick testified that a few shots to Amanda would have injured her but not caused her immediate death. And you recall some of those. Those could have been some of those initial shots. She was still clearly alive when he returned back to her because you hear her beg, "No, no, no, please don't." He yelled "fucking whore" as he returned, clearly knowing, understanding, and having absolute intent as to what he was doing. And then he continued to shoot and kill her 8 more times, as we now know, after hearing about the 9 various injuries during Dr. Bulick's testimony. And we know he used not only 1 gun, but 2 guns. He began with a 9mm, and once that was empty, he dropped it near Amanda's body and continued with the .45. We know many of her wounds were defensive while she was lying on the floor. If you reflect back to Dr. Bulick's testimony, he testified a lot about the 3 injuries on her leg, where she was likely putting it up to protect her vital organs, and ultimately a shot through her wrist, which re-entered her neck and was a fatal shot. Just briefly, I want to show you and remind you that most of these shell casings here are .45s, but there are the 9 next to the toilet and the 9 there next to the shower. I want to move on to the premeditation as to Lindy. We're still talking about the first-degree murder in counts 1 and 2. We know Lindy Dobbins is dead. We know Dr. Bulick testified that she was shot 3 times. That first shot was likely in her foot as it traveled through the closet door. And then we know she was executed by the defendant in the temple and then shot again in the shoulder area right below. We know that the defendant caused this act, obviously from the evidence we discussed, and from Rachel. And that there was a premeditated killing of Lindy Dobbins. And I want to spend a little bit of time right here. What do we know about his ability to reflect and make intent to kill Lindy Dobbins? We know that Amanda screams, "He's not in there. He's not in there." He was looking for Lamar. They're telling him he's not in there. Rachel testified that Amanda also, during this time into running in the closet and getting into that situation in the bathroom with him, that she says, "It's Rachel and Lindy, it's Rachel and Lindy," referring, that's who's in the closet. He knows, he's been told who's in the closet, but that doesn't stop him. He shoots Amanda, as we know, and then that doesn't stop him. He turns his attention back to the closet, shoots his way into the closet, and then upon walking in and clearly seeing Lindy there with her long dark hair pulled back, he executed her as she was hiding. The best friend that he felt was as in her ear, in his words, and meddling in their relationship. And you saw where she was, and it's clear who she is as she's hiding in the closet. And you saw this very, very intentional execution-style shot she took to the head. I want to move now on to count 3 in this case, the attempted first-degree murder of Lamar Dubberly. In attempted first-degree murder, there's 3 elements. You heard them explained again, but it's that the defendant did some act intending to cause the death of Lamar Dubberly that went just beyond thinking about it. And as we know here, we know that he began shooting into the home, and he was yelling, "Where is he? Where is he?" He knew he was there. He clearly knew he was there. He went there looking for him. Those words were heard from the backyard. He believed Lamar was there, and he entered the home and began searching for him still. And you can hear some of that on the 911 calls. Where is he? He acted with a premeditated design. It's the same thing, all of the evidence we've been discussing before as it relates to wanting to go there and shoot and kill Amanda and Lamar apply here. And that the act would have resulted in the death of Lamar Dubberly, except that someone prevented the defendant from killing him, or he failed to do so. Obviously, in this case, when he shot into the home, he failed to kill Lamar. He wasn't hit, and then Lamar ran and escaped. So at that point, Mr. Colley was unable to kill him, even though that was his intent. I want to move on to count 4, the attempted first-degree murder as to Rachel Hendricks. In this case, as to Rachel, we have both theories again that we've been discussing this morning, and I'll go over those with you here as they apply to Rachel. that, again, the defendant did an act intending to cause Rachel's death that went beyond thinking about it or talking about it. So what do we have as to Rachel? Similar as to Lindy, that he shot into a closet after being told Rachel and Lindy were in there. That closet was being barricaded. If you recall Rachel's testimony, she wasn't letting him in. He was getting resistance. You can see the damage to the door after having kicked it and things of that nature. He knew human beings were inside that closet. He was being told they were Rachel and Lindy, and he continued to kick and shoot his way in. That he acted with a premeditated design to kill Rachel as well. Again, after he's being begged to stop, he turns and shoots Amanda, and that's not good enough. He keeps going. He said he was going to shoot, and then he shot into the closet. He knew what he was doing. And then again, that it would have resulted in her death, but for the fact it was prevented or he failed to do so. And obviously, thankfully, the bullet that entered the closet merely grazed her arm, and then she was able to escape out of the closet as he walked past her. So he failed in doing so. And again, we have the attempted felony murder. That he committed a burglary, as we know, on that date of that marital home on Bellagio, and that during the commission of the burglary, he committed an intentional act. That's not an essential element of burglary. And in this case, that's the act of shooting into the closet after being told who was in there and knowing that there were people in the closet. And that it could have, but did not cause the death of Rachel Hendrick. So as you see, the elements are very similar between the two. The difference being the premeditated intent, which we know he had, and the fact that he was committing a burglary when he was doing these things. Count 5 is burglary of a dwelling while armed with an assault and battery. Count 5 and count 6, you will see, are both they're both labeled burglary. Count 5 is the burglary that occurred at the time of the homicide. This is the burglary that occurred at 10:30 in the morning. All right, count 6 is going to be the burglary in the middle of the night we're talking about. Again, we've talked about a lot of this, but these elements is that he entered in the home that was in the possession of Amanda, which we've talked about, and I showed you the injunction, which gave exclusive possession of that home to Amanda. He was not allowed to go near in that home. At the time of entering, he had the intent to commit an assault or battery. That's the elements of burglary. And we know that not only did he intend to commit an assault or battery, but in this case, a homicide. You'll get and you have been read the instructions on the assault and battery, and I've got them here for you. Obviously, he assaulted and battered both Lindy and Amanda inside this home, and also Rachel, for that matter. That all occupants of the home were scared when the gunfire rang out, and they ran away from it because they feared the violence was about to take place. And then a battery is nothing more than a simple intentional touching or striking of another person that's against their will. So if he'd walk in that house, and instead of using a gun, he'd punch somebody. That's a battery. It's an intentional touching. So is shooting someone with a firearm. It's not only a battery, it's homicide. And that during this, when you get your verdict form at the end of the case, you will have your verdict, and then you'll be asked a series of questions. And one of those is about whether he was armed with a firearm, possessed a firearm, discharged a firearm, and as we know, he did discharge, causing the death to Amanda and Lindy while he was in that house. Same elements as to count 6. Count 6 is just the burglary that occurred in the 4 o'clock hour in the morning. What's the evidence that we know he did that? We know he did that. You heard Mike Dickens say that the defendant admitted he did that. The defendant left the home, showed Mike Dickens the adult toys he found in the home. Mike Dickens told you, he even texted him afterwards, like, you shouldn't have done that, you're going to get in trouble. Okay, we have that admission by the defendant that he did that. We also have cell phone evidence. We have the mapping from the night before. It puts him there, 4:41 a.m., that call to Mike Dickens. He's hitting a tower near the Mirabella neighborhood, and we know from his phone itself that he took photographs of those toys that logged in his phone at approximately 3:47 a.m. So we know he's there, and we know that home was in the possession exclusively of Amanda. And at the time he entered on that night, the 4 o'clock-ish hour, that burglary, he had the intent to commit a stalking, a theft, or a criminal mischief. What do we know about that? We know that when he arrived, Amanda wasn't there. Amanda was with Lamar. He went to a home that he was not allowed to go to, forbidden by the court to go to, found out his wife wasn't there, so he went inside. And by going inside and ransacking and stealing items from that home, he was committing stalking, theft, and criminal mischief for his damages by the home. And I just wanted to remind you of some of that by showing you these photos, and you saw a lot of them in evidence in this case. Obviously the damage to the television, the clothes strewn about, all evidence of his activities in the house that night. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, count 7 for your consideration is aggravated stalking. And in this case, there's 3 elements to aggravated stalking that the judge went over with you. The first one is that the defendant knowingly, willfully, maliciously followed, harassed Amanda Colley. In this case, he is charged for the time period on 8/27. Everything that occurred on August 27th, from starting after breaking into the home, all throughout the morning. He broke in the home, which is an act of following her and harassing her. The harassing texts and calls began shortly thereafter, and we know they continued all the way up to and after court. And then obviously the ultimate act of stalking, following, and harassing her is showing up back to the marital home wherein he killed her and her best friend. We know at the time of doing all of these activities, he had an injunction for protection against him, and the court had imposed a prohibition of conduct on him. He wasn't allowed to see her, and that's listed in the injunction. The third element of aggravated stalking is that he had to know that the injunction or the prohibition against him had been entered. And of course, you heard from Deputy Pittman in this case, who works in civil process, and he told you that he served that injunction on the defendant in this case on August 10th, 2015, which is obviously weeks before this activity. And there's no doubt that the defendant knew he was not allowed to be in the home that night. The judge read you instructions earlier, and he told you that in this case that you must return a verdict for the highest offense proven beyond a reasonable doubt. We've heard a lot about lesser included charges, but your duty is to hold the state to its burden and return a verdict for the highest charge proven beyond a reasonable doubt. It will soon be time for you to consider all of this evidence in the case in making that decision. And when you go back into the jury room, I want you to not forget some of the evidence in this case when you consider premeditation and the major charges in this case of first-degree murder. I don't want you to forget about all the choices he made on August 27th, all the time he had to reflect. Don't forget that he could have left court and gone to work. Don't forget he could have let his issues with Amanda go. You heard he had a new girlfriend as well, Amy Mason. They had plans to go to a wedding. Could have let it go, but he couldn't. Don't forget that he returned to that house on Garrison and obtained those firearms. That he drove 15 miles. It's a long time to think about what you're about to do. Don't forget that when he didn't find Lamar inside the home, that didn't stop him. He could have left, he could have run out the front door looking for him. But it didn't stop him. When he couldn't find Lamar, he continued to hunt and hunt for him. Decisions. Don't forget the words of Amanda Colley as she was pleading for him to stop. His dad begged him not to do it. People are telling him to stop, but he's not listening. And even after she shot and he kills Amanda and she hears him kill her friend, she still says, no, 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 please don't, upon his return, as she's shot and killed 8 times. And don't forget the words of Lindy Dowdens and how she knew she was going to die. She heard him shoot Amanda outside the closet. She felt the shot go through her foot. But he didn't stop. Don't forget, he went in that closet. He didn't have to. And don't forget the testimony of Rachel Hendricks and Lamar Duberly, what they heard and what they witnessed on that day, and how it ties all of the evidence in this case together. But the evidence in this case will lead you to the only lawful decision, and that the state will be back before you asking you to return a verdict of guilty as charged as to all 7 counts in the indictment. Thank you.